There's literally dudes out there first day in the gym that will grip and rip 4 plates off the ground. If you clicked on this, you're not that guy, pal. But you will be, because if you follow these key principles and 5 exercises, you can reach a 4-plate deadlift and beyond in only 8 weeks. Probably even sooner than that. Don't stay stuck below 4 plates, man. Let's get into this shit. Let's start with some context. Your average height with average leverages and are pretty skinny trying to gain weight. You walk into the gym, try the deadlift, and your max is like 135 to 225 pounds. Firstly, the deadlift uses 3 prime movers: the glutes, hamstrings, and quads. The rest of the muscles are used in stability, specifically all of the back musculature like the spinal erectors, lats, and traps. Building up these muscles individually will contribute to a higher deadlift. The obvious first lift we'll be doing is the deadlift itself. I'd start with conventional as it's a more basic movement pattern. One of the rules of getting stronger is the principle of specificity, which means practicing what you want to get stronger at. I recommend doing deadlifts at least once a week, but not more than twice per week without ensuring that you can recover from it first. You must build a high technical ceiling to get the most out of the lift itself. The deadlift is a solid muscle builder, but it's hard to learn, and beginners try to rely only on it, getting fewer results than they could otherwise. It's like trying to learn math without having learned how to count yet. This isn't a technique video, but ensure you master these 2 skills, the hip hinge and the core brace. Also, look to master slack pulling once you have mastered the first 2. As you develop your technique, you'll rely on other lifts to better isolate and build up your muscular base. Think of the deadlift where you practice, go heavy, and be methodical to ensure strength and safety. Then, think of everything else as lighter work where the focus is training hard as fuck to get the stimulus to build muscle. The exercises are easier to learn and can be done with higher volume. I'll outline more specifics later, like volume. I gotta let you in on a secret though. The deadlift isn't actually part of the key lifts in this list. That's because, well, it's obvious. So let's move on. On to the real key lifts. Firstly, we got the Romanian deadlift, or good morning. They're hinge movement variations where the weight never rests on the ground. So 1, you get that loaded and controlled eccentric. 2, they reinforce you to keep a strong brace and a more neutral spine. And 3, they allow you to stimulate the prime mover muscles involved in a deadlift without being nearly as taxing. This means you can do more sets of these than the deadlift itself and reap most of the benefits without worrying about a performance plateau, for example. My preferred setup is one day in the week I do deadlifts, and the other day I do Romanian deadlifts. These exercises are a literal value meal, bro. The difference between good morning and RDL will be where the bar is placed. The RDL has the bar in your hand and the good morning has the bar on your upper back. I recommend just starting with an RDL for simplicity, but the unique advantage of the good morning is that it offers even more recovery since the weight will have to be lighter. The second key lift will be the barbell squat and its variations, specifically the barbell version because the stability requirement allows it to transfer over much better. We're not exactly just looking for quad growth here, but also core, low back, and glute development. Front squats or SSB squats are specifically the variations I'd say have the most carryover, because the weight is shifted forward. You have to stay upright or else you're gonna vomit the weight, which hammers your back and hip extensors. You can barbell squat 2 times per week without many recovery issues. I'd recommend 1 day of back squatting and 1 day of front squatting. The third key lift will be the barbell row and its variations. It's less mandatory here that it's the non-chest supported version because the weight is a lot lighter, so the stability benefits aren't as crazy. I'd still recommend it for the best carryover though. This will be great for building up your entire back, especially the upper back. The variation I'd recommend is the Penlay row, specifically the deficit Penlay row, to add more range of motion. It's like a deadlift row hybrid where the weight dead stops on the floor each rep, which develops your back to fire right off the ground. I'd recommend both variations for full development. 1 day classic bent over and 1 day Penlay. The fourth key lift will be the hamstring curl. Lying or seated versions work, but I would prioritize the seated one because it puts you in basically a deadlift position. This places your hamstrings in that same lengthened position that you would in the deadlift, which provides more length and tension and growth. You could argue that lying might be better for training the hamstrings with more variety. To that, I'd say just use both variations. Either hamstring curl version will get the job done of stimulating hamstring growth. I recommend 1 day lying and 1 day seated. The final key lift will be pull-ups. Standard pull-ups will be preferable over chin-ups for more upper back development. One huge benefit of pull-ups is how much they activate the core. It's essentially a vertical plank. Master the pull-ups and the additional back mass and core stability will carry over to the deadlifts. The lats are one of the most active stabilizer muscles on deadlifts to keep the bar close to you. I would recommend pull-ups 1 to 2 times per week. That is all for the exercises. Now on to more specific volume, reps, and progression recommendations. For each exercise, I recommend sticking to 2 to 3 sets. 3 sets for every exercise if you have the time for it. If you didn't know what a progression scheme is, it's simply just how we modify training variables like the weight over time to get stronger. With the deadlift specifically, I recommend a simple 5 reps across with the last set being an AMRAP, as many reps as possible. This method of doing reps is known as plus sets. For the AMRAP set on the deadlift specifically, you should stop not when you're fucking dead, but when your form starts to break down. Back starting to round, lost your brace, the set is over. Start with a weight that lets you get at least 15 clean reps on your last set, then we're gonna do what's called a linear progression, where every session after, we will add 5 pounds to the bar and repeat. This could total up to 5 to 10 pounds per week. In the first 3 to 5 sessions, you could honestly add in 10-pound jumps. Once you get to the point where your last set is lower than your target reps of 5, then that is where you drop back by around 50 pounds and start the progression over again. You should be able to break to a higher PR next time around, and you repeat this indefinitely until you begin to need a more advanced mode of training, or you decide to specialize primarily in muscle growth. This mode of progression can also be done with variations of deadlifts like RDLs, but I wouldn't recommend it on good mornings. For every other exercise, you're going to be doing what's called a dynamic double progression. So basically, instead of reps across, you have a rep range, like 6 to 8. Every set is an all-out effort to reach the end of that range with as many sets as you can. Once you reach the end reps for the first 2 sets, then you add 5 to 10 pounds and repeat the progression. It's as simple as that. This is great as it's a slower, more flexible progression for lifts which you don't really get strong nearly as fast on. I recommend using the rep ranges 6 to 8, 8 to 10, and 8 to 12. Alright, next up. What about deloading? I'd say if you're under the 315 pounds deadlift zone, you likely won't have to worry about this unless you are genuinely overtraining. The reason why you shouldn't worry so much is that you just aren't strong enough to create enough systemic stress. You can create a lot of local stress, yes, and feel yourself training hard, but deadlifting 200 pounds for 5 hard reps is very different from 400 pounds for 5 hard reps in terms of the recovery you will need afterward. Once you start getting heavier though, you'll notice more frequent strength plateaus and potentially overuse issues. So in those cases, yes, it would be wise to start incorporating deloads. However, here is one thing to note. Deloading is already sort of built into the linear progression scheme. That weight reset is a period to allow you to recover and rebuild training momentum. You don't always have to deload absolutely everything. If you can still progress in your presses, for example, but your deadlifts are really fatiguing you, then just deload the deadlifts and related exercises. The deload protocol I recommend for the other lifts is just simply using 1 set instead of 3. Volume is a large contributor to recovery cost and intensity, so if we can drastically reduce volume, that should allow us to recover. In the worst case scenario, you'd be taking an entire break from the gym. Should you max out? There is no point in maxing out in 1 rep maxes besides competition or providing proof of strength, which is not necessary as you can prove you are getting stronger through your rep work. 1 rep maxes do not contribute to meaningful training volume and are highly fatiguing. How do I go past the 405 pounds mark? Usually you can continue the linear progression for a bit longer, but eventually you're gonna hit a point where the fatigue is just too much per session and you plateau for weeks and weeks. If you made sure your diet, sleep, and general recovery are on point, then the next step would be a slightly more complicated progression scheme. The purpose of this is to space out hard PR attempts further apart to allow more recovery. In between each attempt, you will be training in different training thresholds, so like different rep ranges, weights, variations, etc. So an example of this would be a wave progression. It's simply a progression scheme where you start at an easy load, usually higher volume and lower intensity, and progress it upward each session/week to a PR attempt, which is usually just an AMRAP set with a new heaviest weight. So it may follow a 3-week cycle of an easy, medium, and hard session. Then after that, you reset and drop back down to a weight slightly higher than where you started and repeat. Each of these blocks count as a wave, following a wave-like pattern. So what that could look like is like an easy 5x10, next week a medium 3x10 at a higher weight, and then ending off with a 1-set AMRAP at an even higher weight. Alright, so to recap, you want to focus on practicing getting good at deadlifts, 3 sets of 5 reps, 1 to 2 sessions per week using linear progression. Then you want to include all 5 key lifts in your program, as well as using 3 sets and dynamic double progression. Once you get stronger and start seeing diminishing progress, look into deloading and eventually a new progression scheme. Hope you found this helpful. If you want direct help with managing and running your program, we can have a chat, man, with the first link in the description. If not, you can just join the free community instead with the second link. The next video I would recommend watching is my guide on sleep. You're not gonna hit heavy ass deadlifts on 3 hours of sleep, bro.